From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. It began with a post on social media that caused quite the stir.
Oversight Dems have received new emails from Giuffre Epstein's estate that raise serious questions about Donald Trump and his knowledge of Epstein's horrific crimes. Read them for yourself. It's time to end this cover-up and release the files.
That message was followed by 3 email exchanges from Giuffre Epstein's account that all mention Donald Trump.
In one email from 2019, Epstein wrote that Trump, quote, knew about the girls. In another exchange, Epstein wrote that the president, quote, spent hours at his house with a person who House Democrats say is one of Epstein's alleged victims.
And then another tranche of around 23,000 pages of documents were also released. It's still only a fraction of the full Epstein files, but what have we now learnt about the convicted paedophile and his dealings with Donald Trump? The story today, the new Epstein emails about Trump.
I'm Josie Ensor, the Times and Sunday Times chief US reporter, who's covered the Epstein case for about 5 years.
Josie, earlier today, about lunchtime here in the UK, there was this huge rush of excitement as the House Oversight Committee in the US released another tranche of emails. What are the emails that the Democrats have now released?
So they've had tens of thousands of documents in their possession for several months now. So they subpoenaed the Epstein estate, who handed them over several weeks later before the deadline. And this includes everything from flight logs to financial records to emails. And we've kind of had this drip release of them. So early, New York time, where I am, about 8:30, the Oversight Democrats posted something on X saying, Trump needs to release the files. Here's the latest about what he knew, alleging there was something untoward about his relationship with Epstein. And so this broke at about kind of 8:30 our time. And immediately the New York Times had a story up, which, suggested the Democrats had given them an advance of that. And, we're all immediately reacting to that. It was just 3 emails between Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein and the author Michael Wolff between the years 2011 and 2019.
So we should say this isn't the end. There are potentially more emails to come, but these 3 they thought were important enough to release separately. And we'll get into those in a moment. Before we do, though, we've known for a long time that Donald Trump and Giuffre Epstein knew each other. We knew that there was a friendship of some sort. Before we get into the details of what we've learnt today, just talk us through what we've known about their relationship.
Yeah, so they've been friends dating some time to the kind of early to mid-90s. They're both on the New York business scene, the high society scene, and they're both living within miles of each other in Palm Beach in Florida. So they both have 2 homes that are very close to each other. They're moving in the same social circles. We have Epstein and Trump, attending the same events, either at Mar-a-Lago or, magazine launches or high society events. And the reports of how exactly these 2 men fell out differs depending on who you talk to and, what day Trump decides to answer the question. He answered in a New York Magazine piece, he said, Epstein is a terrific guy. And so, at least in public, he was acknowledging that friendship for some time.
And you mentioned that they'd fallen out. What do we know about that?
Yes, the White House had always responded to journalists' questions about this to just say, he wasn't happy with a particular incident of Epstein sort of trying it on with one of the members' daughters at Mar-a-Lago. This was in some time in 2007. And then Trump himself over the summer said, well, actually, we had a falling out because Epstein tried to steal the female employees at Mar-a-Lago Spa. And then he acknowledged in that Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who is former Prince Andrew's accuser, So that was the last official account of how they fell out, was that he was unhappy that some of his employees were being poached from his resort. Trump has always strenuously denied any involvement in or knowledge of Epstein's sex trafficking ring or the abuse of underage girls.
With that as the background, tell us about these 3 emails that have now been published. What do they say?
So there's one email, the earliest dated one is from the 2nd of April 2011, and it's a message between Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who we know from the criminal trial refers to herself in emails G-Max, so it's G-Max1 is part of her handle. And Epstein is saying to Ghislaine, I want you to realize that the dog that hasn't barked is Trump. And then we have a redacted name and it just says victim. Spent hours at my house with him. He has never once been mentioned. Police chief, etc. I'm 75% there. I mean, the last bit of it is unclear what he's referring to, but here he was saying that one of his victims, one of his sex trafficking victims, had spent hours at his house with Donald Trump. And then on the 31st of January in 2019 at 10 p.m., you have redacted name and then victim and Mar-a-Lago. I mean, Epstein is not known for his punctuation or his spelling. There's then another redacted bit and it says, Trump said he asked me to resign. Never remember ever. Of course he knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop. And that is to Michael Wolff, who wrote a kind of unauthorized biography about Trump. And he also spent, many hours interviewing Epstein for another book he was working on. What's interesting here is what we know is that from Virginia Roberts Giuffre and others that Ghislaine actually recruited women from Mar-a-Lago. So it's not clear if that's what he's referring to. But, when he says he asked Ghislaine to stop, I mean, that might be what he's referring to.
And tell us about the 3rd email.
The 3rd email is from this time from Michael Wolff, sent to Jeffrey Epstein. And the subject line is just heads up. And the importance level is described as high. So this one was sent in December of 2015. So this is interesting because Michael Wolff has always kind of claimed a sort of aloofness, a distance and an objectivity and all this. But here we have him almost offering kind of publicity advice to Epstein about how to handle. He talks about a potential CNN segment asking Trump about his relationship with Epstein. We almost have him kind of giving out free publicity advice to Epstein on how to handle whatever Trump might reveal about their friendship. And he says, I think you should let him hang himself. If he says he hasn't been on the plane or to the house, then that gives you a valuable PR and political currency. You can hang him in a way that potentially generates a positive benefit for you. Or, if it really looks like he could win, you could save him, generating a debt. Of course, it's possible that, when asked, he'll say Jeffrey is a great guy and has gotten a raw deal and a victim of political correctness, which is to be outlawed in a Trump regime.
As it happens, Trump wasn't asked about Epstein at the time, so we never saw how that would have played out. What has the White House said about these emails? What's their response been?
So in all of these emails that have been released by the Democrats in the House Oversight Committee, they've spent some time to redact the names of victims or people they feel are vulnerable. And so obviously here we have a victim's name redacted, and so there's a lot of speculation about who this person might be. Republicans in the House and later the White House confirmed that this name that was redacted was Virginia Roberts Giuffre, which is obviously very interesting for those of us who followed this case because, she never ever implicated Trump. In fact, she had nothing but nice things to say about him. So this came as a surprise, I think, to those who have been following this, and the Republicans seized on it quite quickly just because of the fact that Virginia, in her lifetime before her death, never mentioned or implicated Trump. So we have Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, accusing Democrats of redacting Virginia's name to create a fake narrative to smear President Trump. They go on to say, the unnamed victim referenced in these emails is the late Virginia Giuffre, who repeatedly said President Trump was not involved in any wrongdoing whatsoever and couldn't have been friendlier, and that's a quote, to her in their limited interactions. The fact remains that President Trump kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of his club decades ago for being a creep to his female employees, including Giuffre. These stories are nothing more than bad faith efforts to distract from President Trump's historic accomplishments, and any American with common sense sees right through this hoax and clear distraction from the government opening back up again.
Josie, you've been telling us about the release of this new tranche of emails by the House Oversight Committee. The Republicans have responded by wanting to state that the victim mentioned in them is Virginia Giuffre. You've spoken to her family since she died. What did you make of that?
I was very surprised. I think the family probably would have been quite surprised to hear that. I talked many times to her brother and others who always said she had faith that Trump would release the documents. I think on the record she was a supporter of Trump, at least in those kind of final years. So there was some surprise. What's interesting is the date of the emails sort of makes sense when we're talking about Virginia. So the emails come in around April 2011, and we know that a couple of months earlier than that, in February, the Mail on Sunday actually published a report identifying Virginia for the first time. So she'd filed a kind of what we call a Jane Doe case against Epstein. So she was anonymized in it, but the Mail on Sunday, managed to track her down to a house in Australia and convinced her to go on the record and be named. So that's the kind of the context of the timing of that email that we can now see. What we do know is Virginia wrote in her book that was just released posthumously, Nobody's Girl, that she did meet Trump personally, which we didn't know about before. And, it was a cordial meeting and he just said, "Do you like kids?" and asked her to babysit for some of his friends' children. We do know her dad was friends with Trump and was the maintenance worker at Mar-a-Lago. But on the record, at least, Virginia had never publicly accused Trump. And she accused many, many men of abusing her over the years.
Yeah, and she was actually asked directly about Trump in a 2016 deposition. What did she say? What has she said on the record about him?
So she gave a deposition in 2016, which I believe was in the civil case against Ghislaine Maxwell, where she was asked if she believed Mr. Trump had witnessed the sexual abuse of minors. And she said, "I don't think Donald Trump participated in anything." This is also something Maxwell herself repeated in a lengthy interview with Trump's Deputy Attorney General and former lawyer Todd Blanche. She said, Trump never witnessed anything, never participated in anything. So while these aren't the first allegations that an Epstein victim might have also been abused by Trump, it's the first time we've kind of seen them laid out like this in emails.
And for you, given everything you know about Virginia Giuffre and having spoken to her family, reading that statement in the deposition, does this feel like it slightly contradicts, the narrative that's been put out with these emails, which is the House committee showing that there is a connection? Does it show that Donald Trump is involved with Epstein in the way that they would imply? Did it raise questions for you about how involved he might be?
So it's not the first time there has been a connection between victims of Epstein and victims of Trump. There are at least one or two that we know of. There's also a 2016 lawsuit that was then dropped from an accuser who said that she was sexually assaulted by Trump at Epstein's house in 1994. So that lawsuit was filed by an anonymous Jane Doe in 2016. Trump's attorney responded by saying it was categorically untrue and completely frivolous. So this isn't the first time Trump has been implicated in Epstein's sex trafficking ring. But I guess what's surprising here is that this is private correspondence that's been shared with us between Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And so there isn't really much of a reason for them not to be being candid with each other.
The committee then released 20,000 pages of Epstein files. What's in those?
They're very interesting. There seems to be a flurry of emails, a kind of panic after Virginia Giuffre came out publicly with her allegations against the former Duke. So intriguingly, we have Epstein messaging Andrew in 2011 saying, "You okay? These stories are complete and utter fantasy. I don't know and have never met Al Gore. Clinton was never on the island. The telephone book is not mine." We then have some interesting emails between Steve Bannon, who's Trump's former advisor, and Epstein. He spent many hours interviewing Epstein, so we always thought that Steve Bannon would be in some form in these emails, in these documents. And we have Steve Bannon saying to Epstein, "Can't believe no one is making you the connective tissue." And then what clarifies it is Epstein then replying to Bannon, "Recall Prince Andrew accuser came out of Mar-a-Lago," which is obviously Trump's resort. And then he says, "Prince Andrew and Trump today, too funny." We then have Michael Wolff telling Epstein that he's interviewing Trump one afternoon in May 2016. And he says to Epstein, "Anything you think I should ask?" So this is the run-up to the election, which he obviously then won. And Epstein replies, "Do you want to be provocative?" And then he says, he lists a number of things that are quite hard to discern, but he says, Trump shuttle, Hawaiian tropic contest, mortgage on Mar-a-Lago, revenue of golf courses as income. People don't want to contribute money as they say he's worth over 10 billion. Why should they? Father brought up chips in a casino to stave off bankruptcy. His loan from his brother-in-law. How much did his father leave? His brother Robert, etc. So he seems to be kind of almost providing Michael Wolff with lines of inquiry and possibly even compromat that he could ask Trump about.
And there will be journalists everywhere following up every one of those words right now, I suspect. Josie, we should mention that this new tranche, the 20,000 pages of documents that have now come out, they've come from the Republicans on the committee. Do we know why?
So far, all the releases of the documents have come from the Democrats on the Oversight Committee. Some have accused them of politicizing these releases. So last time they were released, they, released 6 of the 8,000 that they had at the time and said, look at these links with Trump, and pointed to Elon Musk emails. And the Republicans have kind of kept quiet and not really said anything of it. And then, the Democrats again have released a selective number of emails and documents to implicate Trump. And the Republicans are obviously not happy and turning the tables on them and saying on X, Democrats whine about releasing the files, but they only cherry pick when they can use them as clickbait, basically. And a lot of the Democrats do, turn to their TikTok and their Instagram and get lots of followers by promising to kind of, unveil and release and unseal all these documents and reveal the truth. So basically, it seems today like the Republicans have had enough and they're saying you deserve the full truth. And then they release the 20,000 documents that we're now all poring over.
And is that it? Are there still files that haven't been released?
So Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, said earlier this year that there was something like hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes of material that they had. So when we talk about 20,000 emails, that's a really small fraction of it. And what the public has looked at and received so far probably amounts to less than 0.5% of what could be in government possession.
Wow. So there's still a lot more to come. What has the reaction been from politicians in America?
So the Democrats are predictably gleeful this morning. You have the ranking Democrat, the top Democrat in the Oversight Committee, Congressman Robert Garcia, saying, that these are serious and disturbing emails about the Trump-Epstein relationship and that, quote, we won't stop until we end this White House cover-up, release the files now, is what he's saying. And I think that's the message that's been echoed by a lot of them now who kind of see the political leverage that gives them in this situation.
And Josie, we saw some time ago when Elon Musk tweeted that one of the reasons the Epstein files wasn't being released was because he implied that Donald Trump was in them. And there was a huge reaction from Donald Trump's own base to that. Donald Trump obviously threatened to deport Elon Musk over it, but it certainly seemed to cut through to the American public. What will his base be saying after the releases today?
It's interesting to see whether the White House spin on this, that Virginia is now somehow inconsistent because she didn't mention this while she was alive, or even if Ghislaine and Giuffre in private emails to themselves were making something up on the spot that's, then now being revealed. They're trying to kind of sow this sense of distrust in what is in the files that, it's not necessary that his base will believe what they read. The same thing happened with the birthday letter where, they scrutinized Donald Trump's signature and suggested it wasn't him. And what happened in that instance is the kind of ire of the base was directed elsewhere. So it gives them an easy distraction, as it were, that Virginia is a liar, that, Epstein could have been making this up. He had an axe to grind because of their falling out. There's definitely 100 ways that they can spin it.
But we have seen that this is the one issue where his base do seem to question his narrative much more than they do with others. Do you think they'll swallow that explanation from the White House?
I think we do know that, again, what was released in this latest tranche is not everything that the government has. We have to understand that this is what's come and been subpoenaed and handed over by the Epstein estate. So there is plenty that can still come out. And I know, journalists are looking into these links between Epstein and Trump and going after various threads. So we'll have to see where it all ends up.
That was Josie Ensor, chief US reporter at The Times. You can find full coverage of those emails online at thetimes.com. The producer today was Taryn Siegel. The executive producer was Kate Lamble. And theme composition was by Malasetto. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.